Thanks very much, Michael. I appreciate it. I'm very happy that Michael shared a little bit of the backstory. I was here a number of years ago presenting to the group in a different location on a very relevant topic at the time, and enjoyed it immensely. But there's been some developments and shift for me, and that actually speaks very well to the presentation here today that I want to share with you. So just first off, have you ever felt like you're doing work that is presented as one thing, but it's actually kind of something different? And I don't mean in a, like bait and switch or deceitful manner, but you just think like, well, I talk about doing strategy work, but I'm really doing something that is more about, growth or the development, personal development of the individual. I'm curious, is anyone? So I felt that way from almost the beginning of time, and in many ways the field where I was trained in organization development talks a lot about doing like stealth OD work, right? We come in and we talk about numbers and we talk about results, but we're actually doing something that feels a little bit different. And so for me, I have loved Joseph Campbell's story of the hero's journey, if any of you are familiar with that. So I don't have time to go into the details of that, but it's very much about an idea where an individual is taking their own path toward a future that's important. And it's their own journey and their own path, and they go through ups and downs and learnings and experiences along that road. And it's ultimately a personal quest. But for most of my career, it's really been doing that in a very subtle or even unarticulated way. So what has been so phenomenal for me since the last time I was with this group 2.5 years ago or so is that I've become a partner with SOUL-ution. And here's why I love it. Let's see if I can. This is the tagline. I can really do the work I've been effectively doing for 20 years nearly, but I can be open and honest about it. And that's a really wonderful experience to have and place to be. And I think what I didn't quite understand or believe or fully accept is that there's actually, that this has currency in the marketplace, right? This doesn't just have to be a subtle sort of act or something that's done behind the scenes. We can openly talk about scaling a business and retaining a clear sense of identity, purpose, and mission, and not giving that up and making a painful trade-off during the growth process. And so what's really key and where we've been very, very happy in the marketplace is to really have open and honest discussions about the identity of an organization and how that is a blueprint for its destiny. What a lot of organizations, and I'll share more specifics in a moment, experience is that they begin something in a very soulful way connected to a powerful sense of identity, and then one thing leads to another. Success comes, growth occurs, and that identity is lost or the soul feels extinguished. So a problem that most people would love to have and maybe not even consider it a problem before it materializes is, how do I deal with hyper growth in a way that doesn't force me into a trade-off of giving up what I love and who I am and why I got into doing this work and founding this organization to begin with. So how do we really look at that identity, that soul, and scale it, build on it, bring more people into it, and drive it forward? Of course, what has made this work is the marketplace, right? We can sit around and talk and pontificate about how great these concepts are, but they really don't matter unless there's a market for it. And what I didn't quite believe and trust until I've seen it materialize in the last couple of years is that these organizations, including a unicorn or two, are very committed to doing that work. It's not something that is discussed outside of meetings and just on the down low in the QT. This is actually work that people are doing and talking about in a very conscious and deliberate way. And so that not only has created massive opportunity for the coaching and the consulting work, but it's also given me a great deal of hope. Because culture and professional development don't necessarily just lead to a short-term result, but they do to a longer-term sense of impact and generosity and opportunity to other people. So I've had a chance to work with, this isn't the full list, this is a partial list, to work with many of these firms, and I've been so excited to bring this work, this connection, this sense of meaningful impact to organizations that say, who we are is really the blueprint for where we're going. What we do and how we organize and the particular structures that come together to make money and drive growth and yield results, those are sort of temporary. They'll change, we'll pivot, the market will correct, all of that will happen, but who we are is really the guiding light to bringing that into the world, and that's our North Star and our compass. So what many organizations that we would work with begin to experience are the challenges of hypergrowth. So initially they're just hoping to grow, and then they think hypergrowth would be a phenomenal thing to have, and then they're in it, Series B funding or so, and then they start to hear things like, this is corporate, this is not the place this isn't the place I joined, not the place I thought this would become. I've been here since the beginning. Now somebody who, is at Twitter or some other larger, more established organization is running this place, running my team. We used to really care about impact. Now we're looking at numbers, and that's all that seems to really matter. And again, right, years before, this would have been a dream to be able to deal with these challenges and issues, but they do become significant and they do become problematic if not addressed, openly and honestly. So the companies that we're working with really say culture is a key part of our success. Taking our soul or identity, who we are, and driving this forward is now an imperative. This is something that is key for us to do. And they begin to really say, like, what is our culture? How do we become very open and transparent about this, and decide if this is going to be an asset or a liability. So what hyper-growth will do in an organizational sense is it'll take everything that's there and make it more intense. It's a gigantic accelerator. So what that normally means is organizations that have very positive aspects of their culture, those become more prominent and visible. And what else happens? The challenges, the flaws, the blind spots, the concerns also become much more visible and much more challenging and potentially problematic. So what begins to occur is you have cycles. Could be a virtuous cycle. Who we are, where we're going, what we're doing is lifting us up, and we're getting the positive benefit of the conversations, the creativity, the ingenuity, or sometimes a vicious cycle dragging us down. The pettiness, the infighting, the challenges, the multiple competing values of what's important are now draining us of the life force, the energy that gave us what we have now. So this has led to some very fascinating culture work. And in this culture work, I'm sure you've had some experience or exposure or just can figure out that there are multiple aspects of culture. What I would say most organizations do when they engage in a culture conversation is talk about the essence. Who are we? What brought us together? What's our shared vision of what's possible? And that's something we certainly bring into the conversation, and that's a lot of fun. It's exciting to do. It's generative work. What most organizations don't do very well in our experience And what can often lead to that vicious cycle would be the shadow of an organization, of the culture of an organization. And won't give a full explanation now, but this is a concept that comes from psychology, specifically Jungian psychology. You know, things that are there but not necessarily openly acknowledged, discussed. Sometimes there's not even a conscious level of awareness. So what we're trying to do is make all of this conscious. Bring it all to the surface. Not necessarily, in a facilitated and organized way, so not in a way that's chaotic and messy, but in a way that is real and meaningful. So you can hear the chatter that comes when the shadow part of an organization is not being addressed in an effective way. We'd never be like this. This isn't who we are. Feel like we're in our own way of success. We need to get out of that. Are we running the company? Is it running us? Are we on autopilot? We've got serious blind spots that people aren't addressing, acknowledging, facing. And those are really getting in the way, not just of our happiness, not just of our day-to-day experiences of being in the organization, but actually of results. So what we've done in a lot of cases, and very often it's in a larger setting, where we have a presentation and an all-hands meeting and break that into small discussion groups, and sometimes it's at the leadership level, is really have a chance to talk through this. And these are not direct quotes, but they certainly are inspired from real conversations that we've been in. And people saying, we talk about value and craftsmanship. That's who we are. Those are the products we deliver, but we cut corners. They hit the deadline. So what does that mean? That doesn't really fit together. We say we're a business, but we feel more like a university. Is this academia? Is this a business? And there's a pretty profound tension. Why are we .org? Maybe we should be .com. Talk about changing people's lives, but I'm not sure if that's, at this point, even factoring into the decision-making that we're having. Very meaningful conversations to have, and these become more challenging, not less challenging in a hyper-growth situation. Because what happens in hyper-growth is people get so distracted and so focused on the growth, the change, the shift, the opportunity, that much of the culture goes very unconscious. But here's the good news, and the way we hold the work on culture, and specifically shadow, is the openness, the conversation, the act of deciding to face it is sometimes enough. So bringing that transparency, making that commitment in an organizational setting to consciously manage our culture, to look at who we are and what's most important and why we're here, but also to acknowledge blind spots that we have, contradictions that exist in who we are, and blind spots that get in the way of our own success. That commitment of doing that and taking the time to engage in those conversations is often enough to really drive a positive shift. So we certainly love to say sunlight is the best disinfectant. It's not always a matter of making a gigantic change or turning over a large percentage of the workforce or making radical disruptive change, but attempting to get into that conversation is a very, very powerful and deterministic decision. So what we've been able to do is have culture workshops that are very meaningful in terms of taking a company that's been successful and helping to position them to manage that success in a very meaningful way and to really drive forward to the next level. So I want to make sure that at an organizational level, you see that, and this is just as surprising to me, there are people doing this work, and it's become a real competitive advantage in the marketplace, is to take something that's often considered a soft skill or a challenging thing to talk about or engage in, and very powerfully steward that forward. Another piece that I want to talk about and have some discussion around is the focus on individuals. And I've got Legos up here.
I think those are Duplos, man.
Do a little work on that, on the images next time. Did anyone read, there was a great article on firstround.com, I think it was about a year ago, about give away your Legos. It's a very profound piece, and had a lot of currency in the tech world. And so this is something that again we have identified and seen as a very profound challenge that people are facing in this hyper-growth environment. Is the skill sets are just not static. I mean, what people need to get to where they are tend to be one thing, and then often where they need to go next is not just the addition of a new skill to that, or a continuation of the status quo, but a radically different set of skills immediately. And that often requires people to stop doing what got them to where they are. And so that's the metaphor of giving away the Legos, is you've got your Legos, they're cool, you know how to put it together, you've created something very fascinating, and now you need to give it to someone else and go do something radically different. And especially for people with an engineering mindset, that's a very tricky and challenging thing to do. Another aspect of this that we've seen is that people and organizations get to the point where they need more infrastructure to manage systems and processes. And what they end up doing is over-engineering things that aren't nimble and flexible. So it's common that we come into a situation where people have very good technical skills, they've been independent contributors in an organization, and they're doing very well. Suddenly they're managing teams of people without the experience of doing that, without the knowledge of how to have one-on-ones and drive performance development and provide and offer leadership that's inspirational and motivating. They've got to give away the Legos of the engineering experience, rapidly develop management and leadership skills, and sometimes then have to engage with systems that the organization is buying that are cumbersome and almost obsolete by the time that they develop. So what's been really exciting to do work on a coaching level with people individually is to take the sort of right-sized coaching approach and plug it into the need at the organizational level. So in some cases, people need application coaching, right? They have a single issue, they need to know how to conduct a performance review, or know how to have a cadence of regular one-on-one meetings with people. That's great. We need 4 or 5, maybe 6 coaching sessions, get people rapidly up to speed, they're on, they're off. Sometimes leadership coaching is the right step. So this is someone who's taking on a more significant level within the organization. There's a bigger picture change, there's a longer term mission for the individual to really lift a department or a unit up. Bigger picture change, there's an ongoing 3 to 6 month relationship. And then sometimes it's an executive coaching call here. This is a big bet for the individual leader down the road in the future, for certain C-level. Let's get a 360 in there. This is going to be probably a multi-year engagement process. But I know for me in the past, sometimes coaching in the executive setting is just this ambiguous long-term relationship that goes on forever and doesn't particularly have a focus. We found that this focus in the setting is the right way to do it. It creates the right menu of options to deliver the just-in-time value for people that they need. So I'm going to wrap up, and then we can chat or Q&A in just a moment. But going back to the very beginning of the presentation, And something I want to make sure to leave with you is that the soul work, and I would not have talked about this 2, 3, 4 years ago, is really gaining currency. And organizations that are in a significant space of not just growth, but also impact and influence on the society that we live in, view this as a competitive advantage and view this as a positive, affirming life force in the organization. And in certain settings, it can just manifest on its own. It's an unconscious process of people who have an affinity for one another and an affinity for the work. But when you're going to scale in a way that needs to be profound, measurable, and change the geometry of the organization, this requires effort, focused effort, and hard work. And it's been exciting to do this work so far. And I'm very excited about the growth in LA in general, and specifically in the San Gabriel Valley, in the startup community. And I hope to be a collaborative resource moving forward with many of you and others in the community. Thank you very much.
David, thank you so much for sharing that. I especially identify with that. I think it's so important that as individuals grow their organizations, that they try to keep those value propositions that started them. I think a lot of people here, entrepreneurs in the house, raise your hand real high. That's like most of us. If you're starting a company, you probably have a very passionate perspective on what you want to create. And maybe it starts off with just this value proposition and the money will come or whatever. We're just trying to solve this residual problem because no one else is looking at it, we are. And a lot of times as people scale up, they focus more on the profits and less on the passion and less on the people. And I think it's really cool that not only does this exist as a model for helping people realign themselves to their initial value propositions and perspectives, but it's actually gaining traction. And this may actually be the sort of cultural and soulful evolutional shift that organizations need so they actually do the right thing by all measures, not just productivity and profit, but also by taking care of their people. So anyway, with that said, we're going to open up to Q&A. John will walk around with the mic. If you have a question, raise your hand. If you would like to share comments or a story, please share that save that for offline. David, will you hang out with us for a little bit afterwards?
I will.
Okay, excellent. So if you want to share stories, later. Questions now. Thanks.
Hypergrowth, as you well know, can occur by both organic means and by acquisitions. So this is very interesting what you're sharing. In a case where a successful company has grown to a certain point organically and now is accelerating its growth through acquisitions, how do you reconcile or make the incompatibility of two different cultures and their values? And what kind of work have you done, or what can you share with us about things that can be done to try to minimize that consequence?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. A lot of my thinking, and I'm going to have to remember the title, is informed by a book I read a number of years ago called Joining Forces, I think. And it specifically talks about the inorganic growth that you're referencing, and has a model, I think, where most, I think the way it's framed is most combinations will end up in one of three scenarios. 1 + 1 = 1. So you end up with a combination that creates frustration, confusion, and a loss of productivity. 1 + 1 = 2. So now you just have a larger organization and no real exponential gain. And then 1 + 1 = 3, where you have some synergy and some powerful shift that occurs as a result of the acquisition. And so the research, I guess, that goes into this suggests that about half are 1 + 1 = 1, quarter, 1 + 1 = 2, and then the remaining 25% would be the powerful outcome that people were looking for. And the idea is that the landmines out there are buried in the culture, typically. That people get dollar signs in their eyes and extraordinarily exuberant about the technical integration of organizations and miss that the culture, the shared beliefs, the operating philosophies, that if those aren't addressed and reconciled, they tend to lead to just a sort of flat outcome or a negative counterproductive one. And so the experiences that I've been through and done with this put culture at the front of that and create a very conscious process of resolving what that will be and creating a unity out of multiple entities. Does that help?
Yeah.
Good.
Thanks. Question second.
Hi. So I have my own business now, but I was at a startup that was really a typical sort of programmer, where he expected everybody to have shots with him and the whole bit, which I really have no patience for. And so I guess my question is, do you encounter that much? Do you address that? Because that seems to be like the real limitation to tech culture to me right now, is that they're not incorporating 50% of the population.
So just say a little bit more. I mean, you gave an example of shots, but what's the bigger picture there, the core concern? You're talking about like bro culture?
Bro,
like Uber,
yeah, the bro grammar.
sort of,
Yeah.
We heard it here first, folks.
No, this is a term. I'm not original.
Well, so, I mean, that's a very good question, and that's, there's a lot in that, right? A lot that speaks to general culture and to, a lot of things in business. So how I would hold that is there's a shadow really running the organization, really. I mean, it's like the shadow has eclipsed the essence at some point. And those are not organizations that want to work with us. So I don't have a lot of direct experience working with people who are abusive, even if it's subtly abusive, or downright disrespectful to other folks. Have we encountered pockets of that are, mildly disturbing and require attention? Yeah, of course, because people are people, and you scale a call like Slack. When we started working with them, was 150 people. They're now 900 or something. 2.5 years later. So yeah, they're going to end up with some people who are cultural outliers or occasionally disruptive or counterproductive, of course. But the larger scale organizations, are who have a shadow running. They're not looking to put sunlight on that and talk about it. So not doing a lot of direct work with those organizations. How do you fix that? How do you address that? I mean, that's probably a bigger picture. I'm not sure I have the time or quite the developed platform to really speak to that. My experience just being around the block for 20 years is that's probably going to be a part of it no matter what. And I would love for more people to vote with their feet and not be seduced by quick money and abusive treatment, and to decide to align who they are with what they do and believe that will turn out positively. Thanks.
Anyone else have a question? You talk about hyper growth and bringing on new team members and how that impacts the corporate culture and all that, and then of course mergers and acquisitions where one company has one type of culture and the other company has another type. But even with early stage companies, they still face that with the founders and co-founders. So I would imagine that the principles you're talking about would also apply in those kind of situations.
Without a doubt, yeah. And we. Has anyone heard of Techstars?
Yes.
In LA? Yeah. So we, Evolution as an organization, I think this may be like news into the last 48 hours. We have a new coaching incubator that we're launching with Techstars LA. And I'm going to have some sort of involvement with that. I'm not sure at this point if I'm going to be directly coaching those individuals who are in the very early stage of a startup. But we may have some other coaches from Evolution who are directly engaged with those folks. And so for us, as we grow, this is really just about right-sizing the work and getting the, because folks at that stage don't often have the resources of what people with, Slack would or Dropbox. But our experience is the sooner that people get conscious about what they're building and how their assets are a very attractive and powerful force, and how their challenges and shadows are inhibitors and limiters, the better. The sooner you point the organization in the right direction, the better off you're going to be. So we're definitely engaged at that level.
Excellent. Mitch, you got a question?
I was hoping you could talk just a little bit about definition creep. You started with, or you mentioned a couple of terms that are, we think we understand, and there are a couple of terms that maybe we don't think we understand.
Great. And
you use them in very specific ways. Obviously, when they are confusing, that gives you a little bit more cachet, and it also gives people an urge to look deeper into the meaning of the underlying terms, especially when you rebrand a concept.
Okay.
But you did talk a little bit about shadow.
Yeah.
And I'm reminded of, and soul being, you were a little ambiguous about whether it's individual soul or corporate soul, and you seem to use them kind of interchangeably there. But back to shadow again for just a moment. When you said it's kind of a Jungian concept, I was reminded of an old design thing, which is when you emphasize everything, you emphasize nothing. If you try to make everything conscious, all you're going to do is drive some of the things you have visibility into under.
Is this a question?
Yes. Could you please talk a little bit more about how you avoid that problem with shadow, of trying to make everything conscious, but finding that the moment you lose focus on one thing, something else is going to pop up.
Yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate that. I wasn't exactly sure where you were going with that, but I do understand. I think I understand what you're saying. So
you threw a lot of buzzwords at us.
Yeah. So this is the way I would say it. Like, whatever the latest buzzword is, if it's agility, right, which was popular a number of years ago, there are two ways of looking at that. There's like capital A agility and lowercase a agility, right? So hopefully I'm not throwing more buzzwords out, but to me, what this speaks to is dogma. And I'll say a little bit more about evolution too, and part of my attraction to being a part of the organization is we say there are no gurus in our organization. And part of, I just like that in a general sense because I think that reflects who I am. But what I believe is so important about that is many people in the position that, coaches and consultants come in with the expertise and the knowledge and the one way of doing something. Everyone has to talk about shadow and it has to be in these 3 or 4 ways or whatever, right? There's some prescriptive formula. I don't think that's true. I don't own the concept, and how you use it is how you need to use it. So getting back to your answer or to your question, to me, talking about shadow is less about conforming to what Carl Jung thought it was in 1885 or whenever he identified that as a force in psychology, and more about having an ongoing conversation inspired by the concept. So if we're committed to building a culture that's meaningful, are we gonna go to a retreat once every 2 years and hire a guy who wrote a book and then all talk about how it's the greatest thing in the world and then go back and forget everything and go back, and revert back to the status quo? Well, that's one model. The other is, let's say that our cultural blind spots, whether we call them shadows or something else, require an ongoing conversation about who we are and where we're going. And to us, if you commit to engaging in that work, whether you call it something we think is the right label or you come up with your own label, and it doesn't matter, but it's the commitment to having that's the most important. So I would say it's lowercase s shadow. Does that help?
It does.
I have one question if there's no other. How often do you find that regarding this paradigm shift from people and purpose and passion and all that stuff to profits and just focusing on making money, how often do you feel that it's from investors that are putting the pressure on a company? And if that's prevalent, how do you re-inspire and reshift both those investors and also the founders and the co-founders of the company to now get back to sort of an equilibrium, an eye to eye?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Trying to think of how to give a short answer to that. I would say the short answer is like that pressure is never going to go away. It is what it is. So it's like if you want to go to New York, right, and you're going to fly, you're going to experience turbulence, right? So you don't want turbulence, then drive if that's not something you want to experience. So
It's actually a really good analogy.
yeah, so if you want to be in a position where you're working with private equity or VC, like you're gonna get raked over the coals, you're gonna get interrogated, you're gonna have like pressure to perform. So the choice then is like, how do you want to manage that pressure? Do you want to manage that pressure by, giving into scarcity thinking and fear and bullying and bro tactics or whatever we were talking about earlier? Or do you want to say like, who we are is our ticket to the success that the investors want, and we need to double down and reaffirm our commitment to that?